In our modern world, sleep has become an elusive luxury for millions of adults. We lie awake at night, minds racing with tomorrow's obligations, yesterday's regrets, and today's unfinished business. The blue light from our devices has replaced the gentle candlelight of previous generations, and the constant connectivity of modern life means our brains rarely experience true rest, even when our bodies demand it. Into this landscape of sleep deprivation and restless nights comes an ancient remedy reimagined for contemporary times: the sleep story. Sleep stories for adults are carefully crafted narratives, designed specifically to guide listeners from wakefulness into peaceful slumber. Unlike the bedtime stories of childhood, which often featured dramatic plot twists, moral lessons, or exciting adventures, adult sleep stories embrace an entirely different philosophy. They are purposefully meandering, gently descriptive, and intentionally uneventful. Their goal is not to entertain or educate in the traditional sense, but to create a cocoon of words that wraps around the listener's consciousness, gradually dimming the harsh lights of worry and stress until only the soft darkness of sleep remains. The concept of using stories to facilitate sleep is far from new. Throughout human history, storytelling has been intertwined with the rhythms of daily life, and the transition from wakefulness to sleep has long been marked by narrative rituals. In ancient civilizations, elders would recount tales as the fire burned low, their voices becoming slower and softer as the night deepened. Medieval monks developed a practice of lectio divina before sleep, slowly contemplating sacred texts in a meditative state that blurred the boundaries between prayer, meditation, and rest. In many cultures, lullabies and sung stories served not just for children, but for entire households, creating a shared acoustic environment that signaled the day's end. What makes sleep stories particularly effective for modern adults is their alignment with our understanding of cognitive science and sleep physiology. When we attempt to fall asleep, one of the greatest obstacles is the default mode network of the brain, the system responsible for mind-wandering, self-referential thinking, and rumination. This network becomes particularly active when we're trying not to think about anything, creating the paradox familiar to insomniacs everywhere. The harder you try to fall asleep, the more alert you become. Sleep stories offer a solution by giving the mind something to focus on that is engaging enough to prevent rumination, but not stimulating enough to increase alertness. The narrative content of a sleep story serves as a kind of mental anchor. As you listen to descriptions of a peaceful garden, a quiet train journey, or a walk through a serene forest, your attention is gently held by the story while simultaneously being invited to relax. The story becomes a safe space where nothing urgent can intrude, where there are no problems to solve, and where the only requirement is passive listening. This creates what sleep researchers call a cognitive buffer, a mental barrier between the anxieties of daily life and the vulnerability of sleep. The effectiveness of sleep stories also relates to their use of imagery and sensory description. When we engage with vivid, peaceful imagery, we activate neural pathways associated with relaxation and safety. Descriptions of gentle natural settings, comfortable spaces, or slow rhythmic movements can trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, our body's natural relaxation response. The heart rate slows, breathing deepens, muscles release tension, and the body begins its natural preparation for sleep. Unlike meditation, which requires active participation and effort, sleep stories allow the listener to be completely passive, floating on the current of the narrative toward rest. In recent years, Sleep stories have experienced a remarkable surge in popularity, driven largely by smartphone apps and streaming audio services. Platforms dedicated to sleep and meditation have invested heavily in producing high-quality sleep content, hiring accomplished voice actors, writers, and even celebrities to narrate these bedtime tales. The most popular sleep stories have been listened to millions of times, with devoted followers who return to the same stories night after night, finding comfort in their familiarity. This modern renaissance of bedtime stories for adults speaks to a deep collective need for tools that can help us navigate the challenging terrain between wakefulness and sleep. Yet, despite their growing popularity, many people remain unfamiliar with sleep stories or uncertain about how they work. Some adults feel self-conscious about the idea of needing a bedtime story, associating the practice exclusively with childhood. Others worry that listening to stories will keep them awake rather than helping them sleep. These concerns, while understandable, are based on misconceptions about what sleep stories are and how they function. A well-crafted sleep story is fundamentally different from other forms of audio entertainment. It is designed with specific acoustic, narrative, and psychological principles that support rather than hinder the transition to sleep. This comprehensive guide will explore every aspect of sleep stories for adults, from the scientific principles that make them effective to practical techniques for using them in your own bedtime routine. We'll examine what distinguishes a good sleep story from other forms of narrative, explore the elements that make these stories work, and provide complete original sleep stories that you can use or adapt for your own needs. Whether you're struggling with chronic insomnia, experiencing stress-related sleep difficulties, or simply looking to improve your sleep quality, sleep stories offer a gentle non-pharmaceutical approach that works with your body's natural rhythms rather than against them. The journey through this guide will take you from understanding the theory behind sleep stories to experiencing them firsthand. We'll look at the neuroscience of sleep, examine the craft of writing sleep narratives, and provide multiple complete stories spanning different settings and moods. By the end, you'll have both the knowledge and the resources to make sleep stories a valuable part of your own sleep hygiene practice, helping you achieve the restful restorative sleep that is essential for health, well-being, and quality of life. To understand why sleep stories work, we must first understand the complex process of falling asleep itself. Sleep is not simply an on-off switch, but rather a gradual transition through multiple stages, each characterized by distinct patterns of brain activity, physical changes, and levels of consciousness. This journey from wakefulness to deep sleep typically takes between 10 and 20 minutes for someone with healthy sleep patterns, though it can take much longer for those experiencing sleep difficulties. The first stage of this journey is the transition from full alertness to drowsiness, marked by a shift in brainwave patterns from the fast beta waves of active thinking to the slower alpha waves associated with relaxed wakefulness. During this phase, which sleep researchers call NBIR or Stage 1 sleep, we remain partially aware of our surroundings, but our thoughts begin to drift and fragment. This is the stage where we might experience sudden muscle jerks or the sensation of falling, brief disruptions that can snap us back to full alertness if our environment isn't conducive to continued relaxation. As we move deeper into sleep, we enter NEK or Stage 2 sleep, where brain activity slows further and the body's temperature drops slightly. This stage accounts for a rough half of our total sleep time and represents true sleep rather than mere drowsiness. However, we can still be awakened relatively easily from this stage, and many people with sleep difficulties find themselves cycling between NBIR and NEK without progressing to deeper sleep levels. This is where the architecture of sleep stories becomes particularly important. Their gentle, consistent narrative helps maintain the downward momentum toward deeper sleep stages. The deepest sleep stages, NH or slow wave sleep, and REM, rapid eye movement sleep, are where the most restorative processes occur. During slow wave sleep, the brain consolidates memories, processes emotions, and the body repairs tissues and strengthens the immune system. REM sleep, characterized by vivid dreaming and increased brain activity, plays crucial roles in learning, creativity, and emotional regulation. While sleep stories primarily facilitate the initial transition into sleep, their effect of reducing nighttime awakenings means more time spent in these valuable deeper stages. The challenge of falling asleep, particularly for adults in modern society, often stems from an overactive stress response system. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis, our body's primary stress response mechanism, can remain activated long after the stressful events of the day have passed. Elevated cortisol levels keep us physiologically primed for action when what we need is rest. The sympathetic nervous system, responsible for the fight or flight response, maintains a state of arousal that is fundamentally incompatible with sleep. Breaking the cycle requires activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs the relaxation response. The vocal qualities of sleep story narration deserve special attention. Research in psychoacoustics, the study of how we perceive sound, reveals that certain vocal characteristics are inherently soothing. Lower-pitched voices, slower speaking rates, gentle volume dynamics, and minimal tonal variation all contribute to the relaxing effect of sleep stories. These acoustic properties mirror the qualities of a mother's voice to an infant, tapping into deeply rooted neurological associations between specific vocal patterns and safety. Interestingly, the content of sleep stories doesn't need to be personally meaningful or emotionally significant to be effective, unlike therapeutic storytelling or bibliotherapy, where the narrative's themes and characters resonate with the listener's personal experiences. Sleep stories function primarily through their structural and acoustic properties, rather than their symbolic content. This is why listeners can benefit from the same sleep story night after night without it losing effectiveness. They are not processing it for meaning or insight, but rather using it as an auditory pathway to sleep. The timing of sleep story listening also matters from a neuroscientific perspective. Using a sleep story after already lying in bed for an extended period of frustration can be less effective than incorporating it into a consistent bedtime routine. This is because the bed itself can become associated with wakefulness and anxiety through a process called classical conditioning. Sleep hygiene protocols often recommend that if you can't fall asleep within 20 minutes, you should get up and do something relaxing before returning to bed. However, starting a sleep story as part of an initial bedtime routine can prevent this negative association from forming in the first place. Understanding these psychological and neurological mechanisms helps explain not only why sleep stories work, but also how to use them most effectively. They are not magic spells that force sleep, but rather tools that work with your brain's natural inclinations and sleep processes. By occupying the mind with gentle content, triggering relaxation responses through imagery and voice, and creating positive associations with the sleep environment, sleep stories address multiple factors that contribute to sleep difficulties simultaneously. This multi-level approach is what makes them effective for many people who struggle with traditional sleep interventions. Creating or selecting an effective sleep story requires understanding the specific elements that distinguish these narratives from other forms of storytelling. While conventional stories aim to build tension, create surprise, or deliver emotional impact, sleep stories deliberately avoid these techniques in favor of qualities that promote relaxation and mental quieting. The craft of sleep story creation is therefore a unique form of narrative art, one that succeeds not by holding attention desperately, but by allowing attention to gently dissolve. The most fundamental element of any sleep story is its pacing, where because storytelling moves at a pace designed to maintain engagement and forward momentum. Sleep stories embrace slowness as a virtue. Sentences unfold leisurely, with ample pauses between phrases. Descriptions linger over details that conventional storytelling might skip past entirely. The precise shade of evening light, the texture of grass underfoot, the subtle variations in temperature as one moves from sunlight into shade. This deliberate slowness serves multiple purposes. It signals to the listener that there is numera urgency, numera need to remain alert for important plot developments, and it creates a temporal quality that mirrors the drowsy, stretched-out sensation of drifting toward sleep. Effective pacing also involves strategic use of repetition. Rather than introducing constant novelty, sleep stories often circle back to familiar descriptions, returning to established motifs with slight variations. A story about a walk through a garden might repeatedly mention the warmth of the sun, the softness of the breeze, or the distant sound of wind chimes, each time adding small additional details, but maintaining the core image. This repetition serves a similar function to a lullaby's recurring melody, creating a predictable rhythm that the mind can follow without effort, gradually spiraling downward into sleep. The narrative structure of sleep stories differs markedly from traditional story architecture. Classic stories follow a pattern of exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, a structure designed to create and release tension. Sleep stories, by contrast, typically follow what might be called a horizontal narrative structure. Rather than building toward a peak, they unfold like a scroll, presenting a continuous, relatively flat landscape of experience. A sleep story might describe a train journey that simply continues, mile after peaceful mile, or an exploration of a house that moves from room to room without encountering conflict or challenge. This structure prevents the listener from anticipating dramatic moments that would increase alertness. The narrative structure of sleep stories differs markedly from traditional story architecture. Classic stories follow a pattern of exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, a structure designed to create and release tension. Sleep stories, by contrast, typically follow what might be called a horizontal narrative structure. Rather than building toward a peak, they unfold like a scroll, presenting a continuous, relatively flat landscape of experience. A sleep story might describe a train journey that simply continues, mile after peaceful mile, or an exploration of a house that moves from room to room without encountering conflict or challenge. This structure prevents the listener from anticipating dramatic moments that would increase alertness.